Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Hello, everybody. This is Guineith Isaac speaking here, and we have. I'm sitting in this week for Vincent Finelli. We have Dr. Norm Shealy today with us. If you'd like to call in, especially with any health-related questions, you can call on 866-582-9933. I think that it's Brad engineering the broadcast today in Minnesota, and I'm calling from country Victoria, Australia, and I'm pretty sure that Dr. Shealy is on the line. Are you there, Dr. Shealy?
I'm here. Good morning, or afternoon, or whatever.
It's just after midnight.
Oh, you're a brave person. I couldn't do this at midnight.
Oh well, there we go. I've been doing some research on your CZ. You're an amazing guy.
Hey, we're all amazing
I had
people.
no idea that you invented the TENS machine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal piece of technology. You know.
Yes, it is one of my better creations.
It's actually done a huge amount of good. I don't know if everybody in the class actually knows what a TENS machine is. Would you like to describe that?
Yes, it's a transcutaneous, that means across the skin, electrical nerve stimulator. It can be placed on skin from head to toe, and it puts out an electrical current that is very mild and safe, and the only contraindication would be pregnancy or an implanted electrical device like a pacemaker. And I introduced this, I started working on this way back in the early 60s and introduced it in 1966. And by 1967, I also introduced spinal cord stimulation, which is also still done around the world. But that's a more invasive procedure where an electrode has to be put inside the spine. But the TENS unit can be used all day, 24 hours a day, or an hour or two a day if needed. The interesting about it is you don't put it over the pain itself. You put it above and below or on either side of the pain rather than directly over the pain.
Oh, gosh, that's fascinating. Now, you were mentioning that you shouldn't use it in pregnancy.
Well, I'm concerned about using anything in pregnancy.
Okay. Well, here in Australia, they're actually using it as pain relief during childbirth.
Oh, now, okay.
I didn't know if you knew that or not.
During delivery. In fact, my wife was delivered of our third child back in 1966. And let's see, what year? 1965, I guess. Right. My wife, during labor, I actually used this before I introduced it on the market. So when you're done with labor, with pregnancy, it's okay. It's just I don't want to take any chance on interfering with the development of the baby.
Ah, I see. Yeah, I just thought I would clarify that.
No, that's a good point. I had many years
ago a friend who was a nurse, and she was very, very excited because occasionally she had to do midwife type work, And she had she had obtained from somewhere a TENS machine, and she was very, very excited about it at the time. She thought it was great.
Oh, yeah, I did. Actually, I did 75 cases in the delivery room way back in the, about 1967, when I was, doing my preliminary certainty of everything. And so I did 75 women in delivery. We were able to keep them comfortable right up to the very delivery.
Oh, wow, that's great. Would it be able to be used in home births in a in a preparedness situation? Would there have to be somebody specially trained to use it there, like a midwife or an obstetrician or somebody?
I honestly, for
or
that
a
kind
trained
of thing,
layman or laywoman.
Well, if it was someone who was trained in it, a medical assistant, for instance, any kind of, but you'd like some training before you use it on a patient.
Yeah.
Now, physical therapists in this country mostly are the ones who dispense them. A few doctors' offices, but they show the patient how to use it at home.
Okay. So the patient is shown how to use the unit at home, and then they can do so for themselves. That's an absolutely wonderful idea, because in the past I've had a couple of moderately severe injuries. I know what pain really can be, and also I've given birth twice in my life.
Right.
And it's kind of a shame that there wasn't a TENS machine there, because on one occasion it was a cesarean birth, which couldn't be helped, because my baby was low birth weight. He was born 4 pounds and 15 ounces.
Wow.
So it had to be a cesarean. They attempted an induction at 38 weeks, but of course it was too early. The induction failed, and the baby needed to come out because he was so small, and the placenta had begun to fail, and that was the problem. And the second baby, what happened was they tried to give me an epidural. That's sometimes called a spinal tap, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And the epidural worked on half my body, down one side of my body, and not down the other side, which was probably even worse than having no epidural at all. And it was a horrible birthing experience. And I was just thinking, if somebody had a TENS machine, I probably would have much rather had accepted that as a pain relief rather than epidurals.
Well, you're right.
Yeah.
I think it is a better way, because by doing that, interestingly, when you do an epidural or a general anesthesia, it blocks the mother's output of oxytocin, the most important bonding hormone. But if you do just relieve the pain through the skin, that does not block oxytocin production. So
okay, I didn't know that about blocking oxytocin.
It's very, it actually is not good for the child, because they need that huge burst of oxytocin during the labor and delivery process. And blocking that means that they don't feel welcome, essentially.
Although, I'll tell you what, I didn't know that, but I made sure that I had as much bonding as I could. Although my second child, he came, it was a birth with a lot of intervention. It was a horrible birthing experience. And actually, the doctors really botched their so-called help. I wasn't able to get off the bed. I was hooked up to so many wires, and what happened was they the labour lasted 11 hours, and at the end of it, they ended up putting a suction cup on my baby's head and basically pulling him out with the suction cup. He ended up with a bruise directly over his fontanelle, and he's always been, I say, well, he probably had an IQ drop of about 10 points, I believe, because of that bruise that he had on his fontanelle at birth, because, of course, directly below the fontanelle is the brain. And as well as that, because of the bruising that he had, he developed jaundice. And he had to go under lights as a newborn because of the jaundice. So they have, of course, they have the blue light, and they put the baby under the blue light, and they bandage his eyes. And I was utterly exhausted after the birthing experience. And what happened was I was woken up afterwards, by this ear-pitching scream, as all I could describe it as, just very, very high-pitched. And I instantly knew that was my baby. And I leapt out of the bed, raced to the other side of the ward, and I saw my boy, and he was under the lights. There was nothing wrong with him, but he had his eyes bandaged, of course, to stop them from, getting burnt out with the light, which you have to do. And he hated it. He absolutely hated the lights. He hated the fact that he couldn't see. He hated the fact that he was naked and he couldn't tell what was going on. And although the lights were warm, he was just thrashing about, and he absolutely hated it. And he had this high-pitched scream, And I came up to him, and I just talked to him and stroked his head, stroked his chin, said, hey, Mum, it's going to be all right. Shush, shush, puppy, shush, shush, boo, 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 boo. Mothering my baby. And he gradually managed to calm down when he realised that Mum was here and it was all going to be okay. But that's not the end of my birthing experience.
Well, let's finish it.
Baby. We'll get back to it after the break. This is Guineith speaking here, sitting in today for Vincent Finelli. And we have Dr. Norm Shealy with us today for both hours. And we're talking about, I was describing to Dr. Shealy my birthing experience with my younger son, and what a horrible thing it was for me and for him. And basically because of the medical intervention, that was just one layer after another of stuff up, really. And about how, what they did really did not, what the obstetricians and the nurses and all of that did, it really didn't help. Now, what happened when they pulled this child out with the suction cup? Not only did it make a huge bruise on his fontanelle, squarely on top of it, but also what happened was they pulled too hard, and it pulled on the placenta, and it created a hemorrhage. Have you heard of that sort of thing happening?
Oh, yeah.
With suction cup births? You
bet. And, any trauma during the birthing process can have a long-term effect. Even if it's not physical, it can be a serious, emotional harassment, if you will, at that point. How is that boy today?
He's fine. The only thing is that I believe that it's God and the power of prayer that has gotten us through with him. He probably would have had an IQ of around about 140 or 145, But as it is, his IQ, it has dropped about 10 points. I would say it's about 130 or 135.
Poor thing.
So you can't notice, but he can only understand. We had, about 2 years ago, we had a full psychological assessment of him, and the only thing is, that is current, is that he can only understand one instruction at a time. So you can't give this child a whole list of instructions and expect that he's going to remember them.
And how old is he now?
He's 14, and he has had a few epileptic seizures in his life. Not many, but he's had 1 or 2 epileptic seizures in his life.
Be sure.
And a number of years ago, we had a really, really serious situation where it was life and death, and we had some very, very bad people basically chase us through a state forest with a pack of Alsatians, which is a whole story on its own. And it was a severe trauma for the whole family, and for about 6 months after that, every afternoon at about that time, he would go into a fit where I would describe it as a PTSD-type fit. And he wouldn't recognize anyone, his eyes would glaze over, and he would just scream for, probably about 2 or 3 hours. And he would race off into the forest and just bash trees and pull things up and stuff like that. That was at the time we were actually there was a pedophile cartel that was after my children, and the people who set the dogs on us were associated with this pedophile cartel. And oh my God, it was absolutely horrible. It really, really was, and I'm so glad that we're not there anymore. But it was extremely traumatizing for my children and for myself, but especially for my youngest son. It especially seemed to affect him. The older son seemed to deal with it, and I had some PTSD type symptoms, but I also, I think, got over it a bit more quickly than the younger child did. It's a terrible set of circumstances, so I might get your comment on it after the break. Hello there, this is Guineith Isaac speaking. Keeping the seat warm for Vincent this week. We have Dr. Norm Shealy with us. I would like to have your comment on when somebody has to go through that sort of real-world, extreme danger, survival situation with children, and the sort of problems that it can lead to, and how you should, what would be good steps to take to enable recovery, especially when you've got, like, for instance, a child with a brain injury. Your comments, Dr. Shealy.
Well, first, second, and third, the best thing is preparation in advance. In other words, I honestly believe that everyone must, if they want to be healthy, do some form of deep, relaxing, balancing mental exercise every day of their life. That can be a wide variety. My favorite and the one that is the most research behind it is autogenic training, because when you do that for 18 minutes twice a day for 3 months, after that you can get by with 3 to 5 minutes every day. And it resets your entire stress reaction, and it just works for everything. Now, on the other hand, obviously, nothing can prepare you for the worst of experiences. There's a very high incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder in women who have preterm delivery babies. obviously most of them were not prepared for it, but still is that. The second thing is, interestingly, the children, of course, born prematurely have a very high instance of all kinds of problems, just getting here even. They are often low in oxytocin all their lives, and they are therefore prone to lots of problems. So in addition to autogenic training or some other technique like that, single best other alternative that is safe and highly effective is something called Air Bliss. It's one of my 5 transcutaneous acupuncture oils, and it's a blend of very specific oils which you put on very specific acupuncture points. So that is the big thing. But we found it good in autism, good in depression, good in anxiety, the Air Bliss.
Yep.
Now, the one other thing is, I hope your second son likes seafood and meat.
Hey, we try and eat as much meat as we can. It's difficult here. We live off the grid. We don't have refrigeration. But normally when I go into town, we try and buy as much meat as we can to take home and eat in the few days after we get home from from in town.
Now remember, remember you can can meat in a jar like the same way you can vegetables.
Okay.
You can can chicken and fish and beef and pork. I mean, it's a wonderful way to keep ahead of things like that. You can can it in 2-quart jars with the metal lids under pressure cooker. And I do a huge amount of canning of everything from tomatoes and tomato sauce to, sometimes when I have an excess, to meat.
Yep. Well, we also have chickens, and we have a dam which has crayfish in it. So we also we enjoy the eggs from the chickens, and we also eat the crayfish from the dam.
Crayfish would be great. Yeah,
from the pond. And they're delicious.
I haven't looked up the taurine content of crayfish. I know that clams have the largest concentration of taurine of any food whatsoever.
Wow.
And, they're many times greater than meat. In fact, all seafood has a higher content than chicken or beef, etc. Taurine is the other thing that is extremely good for helping calm people down, as well as in people with epilepsy. In fact, I've found that almost all epileptics who are not well controlled are deficient both in magnesium and in taurine. Okay.
Yep. Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because what we do eat is a lot of vegetables. We have our own vegetable garden, and I try and get some greens out of a vegetable garden each day. But as well as that, I wildcraft grow herbs, including things like nettles. Nettles
those are good. They have,
really excellent.
That's where you get your antioxidants is from vegetables and fruits, but there's no taurine in any vegetable product.
Okay.
1 milligram. And taurine is quite high in the eye of crayfish. So be sure you eat the eyes.
What was that, sorry?
Crayfish have a very high concentration of taurine in the eye.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
I had no idea of that.
Yeah, so that's a good source. I hadn't thought of that, but hey, you never know.
Yep.
The other thing, by the way, is the second child. How many years between you 2 children? 2
years.
Okay.
Yep.
If there's
and do you know something? they're quite closely bonded with each other.
Oh, yes, that is not uncommon, especially when they're the same sex.
Yeah.
But sometimes, depending upon the child, this is individual. If there's less than 3 years, the second child may feel that they're not getting their fair share of attention. And second children and fourth children are the most likely to have psychological problems compared to first or third. I mean, all of these studies show all kinds of interesting things.
Yeah. I try, because there's only 3 of us, I try and make sure that everybody gets a fair go.
Right. You know,
and it's probably a lot easier, because there are only 3 of us, for me to monitor and make sure that that everybody gets treated more or less the same. And that's probably a really good thing. But it's interesting what you're saying there. His psychological health generally these days is excellent. Okay, he loves to play Minecraft.
What's his birthday?
His birthday is the 5th of April, so he's an Aries.
Oh yeah, he's a fire sign.
He loves to build.
Right.
He loves to make things.
And what's the birthday of your other son?
It's 11th of February.
Okay, he is a butterfly chasing a rainbow. That's the Aquarian.
He's an Aquarius, but the thing is, I actually have a book here. I have a lot of esoteric kind of books because I work as a psychic, and I like to keep my education up. And it's called something like the Big Book of Birthdays. And my oldest son, he actually has the same birthday as Alex Jones. And anyone who's born on the 11th of February has this very, very driven personality. They're not your typical Aquarius.
Interesting.
Who is so heavenly minded they're of no earthly use. These people are absolutely driven. They have a very clear vision of how the world really operates, and if they can see that something's not quite right in the world, then they are very vocal and very assertive in letting everybody know about it, and it's just no good until the problem's fixed.
And now
it describes Alex Jones in a nutshell, and it also describes my son in a nutshell.
Right.
And it's really interesting because I went through this book and I basically looked up everybody's birthday that I could possibly think of, including my own, which is the 29th of November, and they were all a match, basically. And it's interesting because one of my favorite authors was always C.S. Lewis, right from when I was a little girl, and of course he was born on the 29th of November as well. And that, I think, was very interesting because there's a lot of personality matches there too.
Well, yeah, I'm a big... What's your birthday?
29th of November.
Okay, so you know what I say to people? Yes, if you are good in this life, they'll let you come back next time as a Sagittarian. That only offends 11 out of 12 people. I'm December 4, so I'm very Sag. But all of these things influence. They don't control us. They influence us, like everything else.
Yeah.
And basically, we ultimately control ourselves if we have, a good enough ego to take care of it. This is one of the interesting things. The ego has gotten such a bad break since Freud the fraud, but ego is essential. You got to feel good about yourself in order to take care of yourself.
That's absolutely true. And I think that you've also done some reincarnation research, haven't you?
Oh, huge amounts, yes.
I would like to discuss that. I think we're at the top of the hour.
Not quite.
Not quite?
Got another 10
we've
minutes.
got one more segment. I would like to spend some time discussing reincarnation research with you after we get back from the break. Hello there, everybody. This is Guineith Isaacs speaking, sitting in for Vincent this week. We have Dr. Norm Shealy with us, and we're going to discuss in this segment reincarnation. And, I'm very, very interested in reincarnation research and just going and studying people who live in this present world and who they might have been in a past life, okay? And I'll tell you some of the results of my research, and you can comment if you like. Donald Trump, in my humble opinion, has definitely been here before. And I consider that he's probably the reincarnation of George Patton, General Patton.
I hope so.
If you look at his face and you look at photographs of General Patton, you will actually find his demeanor, the way that he walks, even his habit. He's got an absolutely upstanding moral fiber, Donald Trump, and yet he has this habit of just saying the wrong thing sometimes. And sometimes, and his enemies hate him. And they hate him because he's good, and they try and paint him as being bad. And yet the only thing that he does is he has, I don't know if he's a Sagittarius, I don't know what his birthday is, but he has this habit of really putting his foot in his mouth at times.
Hey, I just looked it up on the Internet. There are 479,000 results related to is Trump the reincarnation of Patton. So this is
really so. I'm not alone in thinking
you are
that.
definitely not alone. There are at least 479,000 of us who
wow.
believe the same.
There's a good reason. If you go to a Google image search and open up tabs or open up another window and then look at General Patton's profile, and then look at Donald Trump's profile, you'll be absolutely astounded. To see the similarity.
Absolutely fascinating because Patton was pretty controversial, but he's improved in this lifetime.
He got things done though.
Oh yes,
and
I agree.
He won most of his battles.
I think one of the greatest errors of the media and everything they do in this country is probably nonsense. But one of the greatest errors is their attack on Trump.
Yeah. He's a good man. He really, really does try to do the right thing. But you'll notice as well, in the life of Patton, the media hated him too. They absolutely did. They would follow him around and they would deliberately look for something that he was doing wrong, despite the fact that none of them could hold a candle to his, military ability. What he did was absolutely phenomenal in U.S. history. Yep. Okay. Another one, going back to Alex Jones. Alex Jones and Winston Churchill. Same thing. If you look at them side by side, get the photos of Churchill when he was in his 40s, and look at him. Look at how he spoke. Look at his mannerisms. Look at his facial structure. And even the fact that Alex Jones once admitted on air that he didn't mind smoking a cigar from time to time. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Well, we'll have to talk more about reincarnation in the next segment.
That's right. You don't change that much. This is Guineith Isaac speaking again, calling from Australia, sitting in for Vincent Finelli this week. We have Dr. Norma Shealy on the line, and we are discussing reincarnation. There's another type. In the process of my research, I came across another type of reincarnation called a walk-in. Do you know what a walk-in is?
Oh, sure. You're getting into, some pretty metaphysical, far-out things, but of course I've been there for most of my life, maybe several lives. A walk-in is a soul, if you will, coming into a person who in this life is already there as a soul. Sometimes it happens theoretically after a major trauma, physical or otherwise, and it can take over. And of course, a walk-in can be negative or positive. I have personally encountered 6 demons when I'm working with people. True had to do, exorcism.
Yep.
And that's a really bad walk-in, if you will.
Yeah, I would agree that I trained as an exorcist a long time ago, and it can be really bad when things start to manifest, and it has to be seen to be believed, the things that can happen. But what I'm talking about is like, I know of a case of where the grandfather died when the grandson was 6 weeks old, and the grandson grew up to be pretty well identical to the grandfather. And,
I think that can happen. I don't know how often it happens, but theoretically, the soul of the grandfather could have been hanging around and getting into the body even at birth, because there is also something called dual incarnation, where the same soul is known to be living in 2 different bodies at the same time.
Okay, yeah.
The best book on this subject, I honestly believe, and I've read a score of them, the best one is Return of the Revolutionaries. It's by Walter Simcoe. It came out about 2006. And in there, he gives the past lives and current lives of 400 people who were alive and active during the Revolutionary War. And the reason I know a lot about it is I'm one of those people. And I had a dual incarnation. That is, in my previous life before John Ellison,
That's right. I was going to mention about that later on. That's very, very interesting. Another one that I've come up in my research is Ben Franklin, in my humble opinion, has become Benjamin Fulford.
Yeah, I've heard that before also, yes.
Wow. Because I came up with that just independently. And, the facial structure, the frame of mind, the highly intelligent and yet revolutionary bent, as in militia-oriented bent of these 2 men is quite striking,
Exactly.
And, that's the sort of thing that is, it's really quite amazing to behold when you know what to look for. And, this particular child, when he was a small boy, his grandfather was a locomotive engineer, steam locomotive engineer. He finished building the last steam engine he would ever build 2 weeks before he died. 6 weeks before he died, and then he put it on eBay and sold it 2 weeks before he died. And he turned to his wife and said, "I will never build another steam engine." And, the wife said, "Oh, yeah, well, we've heard that one before." But what happened was 2 weeks later, he had undiagnosed gallstones. The gallbladder burst and killed him 2 weeks after he had sold his final engine that he ever built on eBay. And then 6 weeks after that, his grandson was born. And the grandson grew up from when he was a toddler crawling. He would have boxes to play with, and he would line them up in the form of a train, a locomotive, and engines. And he would sit in the middle of these boxes that he had lined up and clap his hands and smile and giggle. And at the time, he would have been all of about 6 or 7 or 8 months old and had never met his grandfather. That's what I mean when I say this is quite extraordinary of reincarnation and, walk-ins, past lives, and so on. And he grew up to have the same temperament and more or less the same opinions as the grandfather. And but I think that it's quite interesting what you say as well of being parallel lives, because
Exactly.
I myself have always been aware since I've started to study this topic that I actually had 2 parallel lives in my past life. One of them was in Australia, and one of them was in Ireland. And those both played into my current personality. And, being able to track the Australian was actually my great aunt, and her name was Gertrude Shearing, and she was an art teacher, and she actually trained with some very famous artists in Australia, and, but what she did was she travelled to Paris when she was a young woman, and she learned how to read playing cards, and she was quite good at it. And what happened in this life is when I had grown up to a certain age, I began to read tarot cards, and I almost immediately found that I was very, very good at it. And the other one in Ireland, she was a revolutionary in Ireland, and she had actually met my husband, and she was a very, very forceful woman. And I've met people who knew her, and basically, even now, people that knew her, she's treated with a great deal of respect whenever her name is spoken. And I'm not going to tell everybody what her name was, but just to be able to verify this information, and that probably has a lot to do with my never give up attitude in this life. But it's quite interesting how the 2 lives have now come back into a single life, and I now have both of those sides of my natures. And by the way, I'm also quite a good artist, and I can draw very realistically. And as you know, I learned to draw as a teenager, and basically picked it up very, very easily.
Well, we do, I think, carry with us a huge, huge amount of stuff from our from one life to another. I personally know of at least 30 of my previous lives, and to me, it's just an interesting one. Theoretically, I had a dual incarnation for almost 8 or 10 years. 8, I think, as Matthew Thornton. Matthew Thornton was a physician from New Hampshire who was one of the signers from New Hampshire of the Declaration of Independence. And he died in 1803. And John Ellerson, who I was in my immediate past life, was born in 1795. So I had and I had one other earlier dual or parallel or whatever you want to call them, reincarnation. So the soul is versatile, I would say.
Yeah. I think that's something where Ian Stevenson, in his research, most of his research was really, really good into reincarnation, but he refused to acknowledge that you could have dual incarnations. And
we can't all be perfect like us.
What was that?
We can't all be perfect like us. I'm teasing.
Well, it's like this. Like I say, I've got vivid, that I've had in dreams, especially of the Irish one, vivid dreams of things that I could not possibly have known regarding her. And the other one, it's just like I just knew what she was. Guineith Isaac speaking here, sitting in for Vincent Finelli this week, and we have Dr. Norm Shealy on the line. Something I would like to ask you, Dr. Shealy, is reincarnation. I know we touched on this before, but reincarnation of whole soul groups. So groups of souls that all decide that they're going to come back, and they all know each other, and they all meet up. Could you comment on that?
Edgar Casey said, you never walk down the street and pass someone whom you haven't had known in a previous life. So it's an opportunity to renew friendships or clean up old unfinished business. And yes, he also commented on groups coming back together. So, yeah, no comment, no question about it. I think it's just a remarkable, part of the broad picture.
Yeah, I'll carry on.
I knew 30 years ago, saw spontaneously, that I was walking in Assisi with St. Francis right next to him. And in 2006, I was up in Canada giving a lecture, and the reincarnated St. Francis came down out of the audience and recognized me from our life together. And he and I,
wow.
And I have found 3 of our close companions from that lifetime. Each of them, when I walked in or saw the person, had a spontaneous knowing that they were other St. Francis brothers, if you will, our companions. And St. Francis, the reincarnated St. Francis, has confirmed all 4 of us as his closest companions. And when 2 of the other brothers and I went to Assisi 2 years ago, there were at the bottom of his tomb is up in a big hole in the wall. Down at the bottom are 4 little brass plaques that have 4 names. And those 4 names are who we 4 companions were in that life. And that has also been confirmed by Kevin Ryerson, who is one of the greatest intuitives for reading past lives.
That's absolutely remarkable. Well, I actually know of one case. I mentioned that in one of my past lives I was a revolutionary in Ireland at the beginning of the 20th century. And, there's somebody that I know who is a colleague of mine in the psychic industry. And I won't name this person, for the sake of her privacy. But in a past life, we've been able to confirm that she was Pamela Coleman Smith. Okay, I don't know if you know who she is.
Name is familiar, but I don't.
She did the artwork on the Rider-Waite tarot deck.
Ah, okay.
And in a past life, this colleague of mine was Pamela Coleman Smith. I was a patron of Pamela Coleman Smith in her past life. And Pamela Coleman Smith and myself in this past life were both very, very good friends with W.B. Yeats. Now, how's that?
Hey. Yeah, well,
and I don't think I've met Yeats in this life yet.
When I met my wife, she was dating my apartment mate, and I knew her from our previous life together. I mean, we're talking way back in 1958, and eventually I asked him to stop dating her so that I could marry her.
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah.
So, you know, to me, I think it's normal.
Yeah. Yeah. It actually does make a lot of sense because, you know, we're all put on this earth by God. And, you know, we have to find, to a large degree, our own way in the universe, but we have a mission to accomplish. We have a work in this life. We're almost at the end of another segment. I think this is the bottom of the hour, is it?
No, this is only a half hour.
Hello, everybody. This is Guineith Isaac speaking here, calling from Australia, keeping the seat warm for Vincent Finelli this week. We have on the line Dr. Norm Shealy. Now, Dr. Shealy, there's a few cases. I don't know who they are in this present life, and I was wondering if you would be able to enlighten us. George Washington, do you have any idea who he is in this present life?
You know, I don't, but Carolyn Mace wrote a book called The Reincarnation of George Washington. And I remember her, I don't think he's here now. I think he's somewhere between, you know, before us, back. And I read that book 20 years ago before it was published, so I'm not sure. John Adams, on the other hand, I know, and Thomas Jefferson, I know.
Okay. Who are they?
John Adams is Walter Semkiw, S-E-M-K-I-W. He is the one who wrote Return of the Revolutionaries. And Thomas Jefferson is Thomas Hanson in this life. He is a Ph.D. mathematician who writes ballads.
Okay. What about Thomas Paine?
Don't know. I mean, he may be. I don't know.
Because he was a very, very interesting guy. He was very intelligent, and I think he was kind of a forgotten American revolutionary figure.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But then he went and, you know, fought in the French Revolution as well. And, you know, then he had ended up having a rather troubled life. But it's just really interesting. And I think that it is rather curious how all of these figures seem to be coming to the surface now. And they're all the revolutionaries of the past. And they're reappearing. And they're becoming publicly known and reorganizing, you know. It's as if that they're all here for a purpose. It's just, for me, as a past life research, absolutely fascinating to watch.
Well, it is. I think we ought to, for those people who haven't had exposure to this, we ought to mention two things. first of all, if you are a flaming fundamentalist who has no fun, you will probably not listening to this show anyway. But despite the flaming fundamentalists screaming and yelling and being angry even at the idea of reincarnation, reincarnation was part of Christianity until 325. In 325, when the New Testament was created by Constantine and his, whoever, they threw out reincarnation because they thought if it gave you another chance, they wouldn't gain control of you. But there's a wonderful book by Geddes McGregor called Reincarnation. He's an Anglican priest, Scottish Anglican priest, who wrote Reincarnation in Christianity. Now, secondly, there are excellent past life therapy people who can guide you in examining your past lives, especially if you have a problem. In my opinion, all major illness, is the result of unfinished business, anger, guilt, anxiety, depression from a previous life, and something comes back to trigger that in this life. Also, the leading psychic intuitive who does past life readings is Kevin Ryerson, who was made famous in Shirley MacLaine's book Out on a Limb. So if you can't find somebody in the United States at least who can do a past life session with you, then you might want to go to Kevin Ryerson. You can find him on the internet.
Yeah. The other thing I was wanting to say is, it's not just the positive people that are reappearing. It's all the negative ones as well, unfortunately. And they are, interestingly enough, playing out their bad guy personalities as well in this life too,
Right.
And it's really quite sad to see is that they're actually not dealing with their karma, with their negative karma from their past life, which was so, bad and all the rest of it. And they just went around spending their whole lives hurting people, and then they come here to this life and they find the very people that they hurt, and then they try and hurt them over and over and over again, And that's, I believe, a very significant phenomenon. It might be the reason why sometimes you've never met someone and they're just absolutely horrible to you. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I have, met people where you just feel absolutely repulsed at the very, angry or otherwise when you meet them, and obviously that's unfinished business from a previous life.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary to sort of think about that these things are actually carrying on from lifetime to lifetime. But yeah, there's so many unresolved issues there. But you were talking about reincarnation in Christianity. Jesus Christ himself mentioned in the Gospels, because his disciples came to him and said, why is it written that Elijah has to come first? And Jesus said, well, I tell you that Elijah did come, and they did to him what they pleased, And it says in the Gospels that then his disciples understood that he was talking about John the Baptist.
Right,
and
absolutely.
But John the Baptist is coming back. And I don't quite know who he is or where he is, but it says that just prior to the return of the Messiah, to the return of Jesus Christ, that John the Baptist will make himself known again. And it's the same as Elijah. And according to a lot of Christian commentaries, that Moses will be with him as well. And that's a pretty strong case for reincarnation. Or some say Enoch and Elijah, some say Moses and Elijah. but it could be as well that Enoch is the pre-incarnation of Moses, so it could in fact be both, because they both had that same life course of being so esoteric and separated that they were just about unapproachable by other mortals because of their relationship that they had with the living God, to the point where their skin actually shone like a light bulb. And but yeah, it's and these two figures are going to make themselves known and do mighty signs and wonders just before the Messiah returns, and basically say what they've always said, which is repent because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. I think that that's the most powerful example of biblical reincarnation, but there are others as well, and one of them is that I can think of on the bad side is this Jezebel figure. Seems to pop up over and over and over again in the Bible. She's Jezebel, and there's also another woman who was a queen of Israel, and her name was called Athaliah, and she actually killed all of the heirs to the Hebrew throne, all the male heirs to the Hebrew throne that she could find, just so that she could be queen. And that's exactly the same sort of thing that Jezebel did. And, it actually flat out says in the Bible that, at the end of days, the whore of Babylon will arise again and basically make life hell for everybody. Well, that would be Jezebel, because Jezebel was actually Babylonian. If my memory serves me correctly, that she wasn't a Hebrew at all. And personally, I think that woman could well be everybody's favorite presidential candidate who failed, Hillary. That could well be, in my humble opinion. But the facial structure is hard to verify because I don't know of any image of Jezebel that's out there, on coins or such like. I think she was so hated that any images would have been destroyed. But what do you think about that, Dr. Shealy?
Well, it sounds just a normal day in the life of the world.
Yeah, well, Hillary's certainly. I was just commenting to a friend today because I'm a bit of a hippie, and I have a lot of friends who would fall into the liberal type camp, and a lot of them are actually waking up and becoming more or less preppers. And I said to one of my friends today, it's really interesting to watch the reaction of people who are in sort of the liberal camp when you say that you're really glad that Hillary is not the president of the United States right now. And their reactions are in one of two directions. That either fully agree, or they go into catatonic fits and start spitting tacks at you. This is Guineith Isaacs calling in from Australia, sitting in for Vincent Finelli. As far as I know, this is the last segment, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is there anything that you would like to tell the class in this last segment about anything that we've discussed today, or anything else that you feel is really, really important today?
The single most important thing is you are responsible for your health and well-being. And if everyone took care of themselves adequately, average life expectancy in the United States would go from 79 to 100 within 25 years. That's the single most important thing every day of my life I think about. A huge, probably somewhere between 80 and 90% of illnesses are the result of unhealthy behavior, unhealthy habit. And so If you have unhealthy habits, if it takes reincarnation or past life therapy, do it. If it takes common sense, do it. If it takes practicing autogenic training and meditation, do it. But the most important thing is take care of yourself so that you don't have to be a drag on anybody else. That's my feeling. But secondly, so you can do what you came to do, because in my opinion, you came to do one thing, help other people.
Yeah.
That's all there is. It doesn't matter what you do, whether you chop wood or build fences or build computers or do medicine or intuitive readings or whatever. It's helping other people. That's the whole purpose. But you can't help other people if you're not healthy yourself.
That's absolutely true. Something that I've discovered in the last few months to help myself is methylcobalamin supplementation. Okay.
Do you know if you have the genetic defect? You know, there is a methyl defect genetically, and
okay.
And so you can be tested for that. But those people must have methyl folate instead of regular folate. They also need methyl B12, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the methyl B12 is what I'm talking about. And I don't know if I've got the defect or not, but what I've found with the supplementation is that it really is winding the clock back for me by repairing the telomeres, reducing my stress levels, which were through the roof of after having 16 years of vexatious harassment from really, really hostile government supposed to be type figures.
All government is
through
evil.
3 states.
All government is evil. Some is more so.
Yeah, that's come to be my opinion, like I said, after 16 years of harassment. But the B12, just in these last few months, the methylcobalamin with its cofactors, the one that I take is Blackmore's Rapimelt B12.
Right.
And because it's readily available in pharmacies, and I actually even saw some in the pharmaceutical section of the supermarket today when I did my supermarket shopping.
Great.
Which I think is marvelous.
Well, the simplest thing is if you don't know, and you're not going to get your genes tested, just go ahead and use methyl B12 and methylfolate. That will help a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely helped me to control my stress levels. I met a friend today. They said, wow, you're looking so much younger. And I went from earlier on this year, I was 42. I was actually looking like I was into my 50s. But my skin tone, my wrinkles are reducing, and it really is winding back the clock for me. So I think we're at the end of the broadcast.
We are indeed. It's been a fun time talking to you. Have a great one.
Yeah, have a great week too, won't you, Dr. Shealy?
See ya.